I'm Aryeh Schwartz alongside Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. The Golden State Valkyrie have a roster. We experienced our first expansion draft in around 16 years. There is so much to discuss. Let's dive in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. That's patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And do not forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at Winsidr.com. That's Winsidr.com. Welcome back to the show. Very excited to be here. I want to start off right off the bat and let you know in our next episode we record, we will be announcing the winner of the giveaway we did during the playoffs. Tell us a story about your favorite WNBA experience or memory. And we have whittled it down. We got it down to 5. Now we're down to 3. We'll be picking a winner on the next show, and we'll share a little snippet from that story because I think all of them were really good of those 5, and of them, there's some really touching, really moving stories that I think other women's basketball fans would appreciate to hear. So I apologize if you sent in a story and hoped that we wouldn't share it, because we're going to share it. So, sorry. All right, Rachel. Before we dive into it,
it's been a couple weeks. What all do we need to catch up on? What hirings have we seen? Is there anything we're missing?
I don't think, did we miss a hiring? We talked about Atlanta.
We've talked about LA. We talked about LA, right?
I think so. Or maybe we recorded right before the announcement. We recorded right before they announced that they're building a facility, or they're planning. They've hired a team to the early stages of building a facility. That's a good move. Look, LA's shifting the right direction. I'm going to be honest. This episode isn't about these other teams. This episode is about the Valkyrie.
You don't want to talk about anybody else. You only want to talk about the Valkyries.
I mean, we can if you want. I just feel like
I just want to make sure we're just covering all the things.
All the bases. All right.
Morgan Tuck, GM of Connecticut Sun. That was a move.
There we go. That was a move. Interesting move, too, because, like, a lot of shifting around in Connecticut where it's, yes, she's the GM, but Darius has...
But then she comes out and she's like, it's not just me. I'm going to have a lot of people around me helping me, which I thought was an interesting comment to make. But hey, you know what? I love it.
Look, I'm going to say this. I reserve judgment. I withhold, formulating a full-on opinion, because a lot of times, heck, we saw this recently in Minnesota where Cheryl Reeve failed as the GM for multiple years. And then as there was an uproar, right, she stepped back. She said, "Oh, I'm not going to be GM anymore." And then she goes to president of operations. So now it's like a sandwich of power. And then she gets executive of the year. So when it comes to, yeah. So when it comes to, these other positions where people are moving into GM, look, all for giving former players more opportunities in this league. They know the league. They have an eye for talent. No denying that. But is it as simple as, from my perspective, at least, this is just me. I had a lot of questions about what Connecticut did going into this season, or this past season. I don't think they did enough. I think the best move they made was a midseason move, but the midseason move to get Marina was also kind of cashing out on the long term and really hoping that could be the piece that puts you over the top for this season. And now they have a whole plethora of roster concerns and issues.
Yeah.
And so was this a similar move of, we should be getting some rightfully due, pushback against the moves we made. And now we're shifting things around, but have things truly changed or similar? And I'll say this about Dallas also, like Greg Bibbs stepping aside as GM and moving whatever, but then in the press release says, like, the decision will be made by the GM, Kurt Miller, and myself, and I have the final. So I think a lot of times, it takes time to fully understand, and talking to people off record, behind closed doors, on background, whatever, to understand who's doing what.
Right.
And are the same issues persistent nowadays? So I'm going to stand back, and with a lot of these moves, it's like we can have that reaction of, I didn't expect that name, or I was expecting that name. But I think to understand it and truly evaluate, critique it, and criticize or compliment, we need some time, and we
Yeah.
need to see the moves that are made.
Yeah, for sure. Well said. Yeah, Dallas Wings creeping closer to a hire. I think we could potentially see something, I don't know, as early as,
Oh, wait. Oh, we definitely need to talk about this. The
next
WNBA
week.
does the most WNBA thing ever and leaks
Oh, yeah.
the Toronto Tempo name. The name was not released. And they put it. Now, I want to make a few things clear because I've spoken to many people over the years of different teams. This was not a Toronto Tempo mess up. Yes, I have my issues with the
It's
Tempo
not the
ownership
Tempo's fault.
management.
It's not
It's
the
not their
Tempo's
fault.
fault.
The people who run the website for the league and for the individual teams is a league group. It's the league. Like, you'll contact teams and you'll say, hey, on your roster on the league website, it says you have this player, but you don't have this player. And they go, talk to the league. We don't run the website.
Right.
So
Right.
this was a league thing that again, NBA tells you best business practices. Does the NBA leak the names of teams on their team, on their league website? No, come on now. That was the most embarrassing.
It was just, I couldn't even, I just was like laughing. And and then of course, the wonderful world of WNBA Twitter finds it, and it's just like all over the place. And it's just, damn.
And then a couple days later, ESPN makes a mistake, puts Gary Kloppenberg as the head coach of Dallas Wings on their website.
Yeah, I was like, that is not, I don't buy that for 1 second. Like, I really don't. And I think I was like calling a television game and you're texting me this. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way.
We're texting. She's like, okay, I gotta go back on
Like,
air. I'm like, okay, cool. Look,
yeah.
a lot of respect and love to Klopp. And like, fine, I could justify it, but then sources come out saying Dallas Wings, that is not our hire. Also, supposedly Washington Mystics inching closer for around a January 1, January 3 hire announcement. Heard some rumors about that. It will be exciting. But the main topic of discussion of this episode, the main topic of discussion in the WNBA right now, first expansion draft in 16 years. Now, the one thing that I want to like kind of educate people on is so much of this happened behind closed doors. Now, it's pretty obvious if you watch the live show, you know that the draft doesn't happen live. You know that the lottery didn't happen live, right? It was already done and then they announced it. You know that the expansion draft did not happen live either. And when you think about that, it's easy to say, okay, they did it and now they're giving us the information. I just want to make it clear for fans, we can't pull back the curtain and tell you that Minnesota made this trade or Indiana, made this back end negotiation and whatnot. Nobody has, as far as I've seen some people who I don't know if I necessarily trust the reporting, but I have seen some from reputable places also saying these players were protected, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's been very, individual. It hasn't been, this is a list of who this team protected. This is a list of who this team protected.
Yeah, and I don't anticipate we'll get that information.
But. Yes. And let me be clear, as media, that is so important to understand what teams are trying to do, where teams put value for players. That's a lot of hurt feelings. That's a lot of maybe, hurt feelings, I feel like summarized it, but that's a lot of, different opinions and different thoughts. And maybe a coach or a team says, we really value you, and then they don't protect you, but there's more to it. Maybe you think the team won't take that player. Maybe there's so many different aspects that go into it. For instance, as we talk about this list, we're going to talk about a few things. One, the amount of players that are actively on contract with a cap hit. So, it's incentivized to take overseas players that are on rookie scale. It's incentivized to take players that were suspended because that doesn't have an immediate cap hit. It's incentivized to take players that maybe aren't necessarily going to come over. And that incentivization, I don't even know if that's a word, works on both ends for the Valkyrie, but for these other teams, right? Rachel, if you have, let's say you're Indiana, right? And you have a few players who are on contract that you're paying a little bit more than you'd like to. Maybe you don't protect those players, hoping that salary cap.
Because okay, Golden State has the money, obviously, so like they can potentially afford to take one of those bad contracts. right, and open up that cap space. I would guarantee you that that is very much what Indiana did. But this is a good segue to talk about like what Golden State's strategy was moving into this, and they obviously had a lot of different options. Had an opportunity to take some of those major contracts that teams maybe did want to get rid of. There's so much strategy involved. There's so much like wheeling and dealing and talking with agents, and I mean so much that goes on behind closed doors, and we just only have a small snippet of the picture right now, because there's so much that is going to continue to happen through free agency. Some of these moves, some of these acquisitions very much could be trade packaged, right? Pre-advanced potentially. So, this list of players that we're probably going to go through here shortly, may not even be there, right? They could just be a short blip in time, to be determined. But it's been interesting to really sit back and analyze it. I don't know, since you and I have been doing this, we haven't had that chance together. So I think we're very much still learning as we're going and taking in kind of the information and absorbing it. And it's something new and it's exciting. And I was talking to someone within the league, and they were like, "Hey, heads up, just don't expect the draft, the expansion draft, to be very exciting." And I thought that was interesting. Like, I think that there's this like thought that, okay, yeah, they're just going to go in there and grab Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, or maybe not even that, it's going to be a bunch of like Alicia Clark and Steph Dolson and, all these names that we've become accustomed to. And so I thought when I was told that from someone who has experience throughout expansion drafts in the past, that was an interesting comment of like, these typically can be a little bit boring in terms of what just like a typical fan might think is going to go down.
Yeah, no, very much so. And let's run it down real quick.
Yeah.
Steph Talbot, one of the three players hitting cap, but she, coming from LA, had a protected contract. So that's 125 vet protected amount. Then Kayla Thornton, 112,000 protected vet amount also. Then Kate Martin, the only other player that's actually hitting these books at 68 with that rookie scale. Then you got Monique Billings, Tammy Fick Bentley, Veronica Burton. Burton, honestly, a solid steal, I think, for this team. Obviously, Kayla Thornton is the name that's kind of going to get a lot of the attention coming off that championship season. Julie Van Loo, also a really smart pick in my mind. A player who, yes, is coming off their first season, is a second-year player. But with that overseas experience, national team experience, is not a rookie by any stretch of the imagination. Ceci Zandalicini, one of the more fun players, the Italian stallion, or as Diana Taurasi calls her, that effing Italian.
Are you a little surprised that she wasn't protected?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all, because here's the thing, and I'll explain it to you in one moment. Then you got Marie Kondi and Ilian Rupert also on that roster, and I am confused because her hoop stats does not have. Oh, it's because
she's not.
Carly Light. Yeah. Coming
but
from France.
She hasn't come over, so she's not. Yeah.
Yes. So the reason I'm not, or was not, surprised by that, I don't think necessarily any of these picks surprised me. Maybe Temi not being protected surprised me. When you look at the Minnesota roster and you look at Zandalicini, losing Zandalicini stinks. That's someone who understands what Reeve wants. That's someone who is a vet who's been around the block. That's also somebody who, and I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here, has struggled to come over consistently, right? But also, now there's been issues with the Italian professional league, the league that she was very committed to. And so now, is she maybe more willing to come over? Is she willing to accept a larger role on this team? Complete possibility. When you look at this Minnesota roster, I have to imagine it's Fee, McBride, Courtney Williams, Alana Smith, Bridget Carlton, and then one other player. And in my mind, it's Peely or Dorka. And I think they had to go Dorka on that. Because if I'm playing GM, it's who are the players that I really want to protect? Who are the players that I hope the expansion team takes? And then who are the players that I don't necessarily want them for my roster, but I know they have good trade value. So I don't want to let them go for free. And I think look, you understand, as it were, that like Jessica Shepard is a player who maybe could, maybe they protected her over Dorka. I don't know. But that's a player that maybe you expect to be taken because she's a little more of a cornerstone. Dorka is flashes of great offense, but she's a role player. You look at this team and it's built on many role players. They don't have that cornerstone yet. They have players who can, be complementary, but not necessarily. And look, as you said, don't expect craziness to happen in an expansion draft. Who could they have possibly gotten that truly would have shifted it? The only thing that maybe is a question is why are they even taking, the 300,000 cap hit of bringing on Talbot, Thornton, and Martin. Martin, you're not concerned about. That's a long-term goal. Cool. Steph Talbot, there's been injuries. There's been coming over questions. I don't know. When you look at this roster, what do you see? Because there's so much to this, right? We know next year we're going to have a double expansion draft, which is going to be even more complicated. We know, coming in a year, we're going to have a new CBA, which is going to make it even more complicated. And to that effect, just so people understand, there is literally none of the top players in this league are on contract past this season. I mean, Ryan Howard as a restricted free agent is like the only player going in to the 2026 season who's not just a UFA. And so that is something that I think you need to keep in account. But Rachel, like when you look at this roster, whoa, give me some cool buzzwords.
The global game, the international game. Speaking my language, I first and foremost, Monique Billings was the unrestricted free agent who was selected. So it'll be interesting. They may designate her as that core player, giving them exclusive negotiating rights. We'll see. I think first and foremost, I love the international flavor. You got France, you got Spain, United Kingdom, Australia, Italy, Belgium. I was very surprised with Temi. I felt like she was such a great piece for the Fever. Very much surprised about them not protecting her. That was kind of maybe if there was like a wow moment, that was maybe the one for me. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because it's like, wow, there are deep ties. And I said this on Twitter, there are deep ties here with the global game, USA basketball. So first and foremost, I think they jumped on the opportunity to get a player like Temi, Monique Billings. I think that this roster screams, we are laying the foundation of, what am I trying to say? The right culture. Like Monique Billings is that vet who is going to go hard every single possession, who knows how to move in this league and be a leader in this league. Same thing that you could say about Kayla Thornton, right? Has had to play different roles throughout the course of her career, but is such a loved and adored player in this league, a respected player of this league. So I think, the veterans that they brought in and they were able to jump on speaks to just like a phenomenal foundation to build off of after that. If they remain on the roster, which I anticipate both of them. I think the Kate Martin thing was a little surprising to me, and everyone's like, well, I shouldn't do anything. Okay, well, first and foremost, I was a little surprised that Vegas didn't protect her. I don't know what exactly. I don't think any of us really know exactly what's happening in Vegas right now. I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of, and everyone's gonna be like, well, why would you protect her? She's not a huge contributor, blah, 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 blah. No, but she's a cheap player on a rookie scale contract that this team appreciates and adores. And from a depth perspective, we know how much that is an issue. They're going to need to pay some people in the offseason. Kate Martin has experience with their franchise, right? She can come in and knock down a couple shots. She's not shaking the boat from a chemistry standpoint. I kind of felt like in the marketability of her, right? I mean, that doesn't hurt anybody. So I was a little surprised that just where Vegas is right now and the changes I think we will inevitably see here in the next few months, at least when it comes to the coaching changes, things like that. I was a little surprised that they didn't try to hold on to just a cheap piece to their team and allow that cap space to kind of stay open. But okay, nonetheless, I think Golden State jumped on the marketability of Martin. And again, this is a player who has played at the highest levels with a back-to-back champion, who knows what it takes in practice every single day, going up against the Kelsey Plums of the world, of the Asia Wilsons in the world. Granted, it's only for a year, but that's basically a rookie scale contract that can come in, can be marketable. And again, it's a good foundation piece to build around. But and then I think the rest of it is, a lot of international flavor. So there's always going to be the question marks of who's coming over, who's not coming over. I want to make it very clear. I think that there's a lot of those conversations going on before these selections were made. So, there's got to be a certain level of transparency there. And I think some of it, expect to see these players over here, but then also expect to see some of them suspended, that they're able to suspend 4 of those contracts and be able to have those assets. And so when I look at this expansion draft, it speaks to me of, okay, a solid foundation. They got some really good vet pieces, but they're going to be highly aggressive in free agency. And how much cap space do they have? Like
everything. They have the most. They're tied with, I believe, Connecticut for the most.
Yeah.
No, and that's the thing, is like the open dialogue happening between the players, agents, and the team is just because they're having that open dialogue. I think a lot of people go, oh, why would they pick a player if that player is not going to come over? Well, you have the rights to that player. So maybe this year Zandalicini is not coming over, Van Loo's not coming over. Granted, I'm not saying, I'm just using names as examples.
Yeah.
But you can say, okay, maybe they're not coming over this year, but I can, for whatever reason it is, this league or this series or whatever it is, international, but we like them for having the rights. There's so many teams in this league that have the rights to international players that have never come over. So all these players, for the most part, have at least come over once. So if you have that experience, you can get them over. It's beneficial to take that player, even if you're going to miss out on them for one season. So I like it. Like, I'm going to be real. Kate Martin is probably the most recognizable name, not necessarily the most impactful on the court, but most recognizable name that's going to pull some eyes. And I think that is important for them to do. But I think if you look at, Vegas, it's interesting because I agree. I think if you look at who they could have locked down, Asia Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, and then you're like, okay, obviously Kelsey Plum, that's 4. Who are your last 2?
But they didn't lock down Kelsey Plum. So what's happening there? We'll see.
Well, maybe they did. We don't know.
Well, no, I'm just talking about re-signing her, right? They didn't.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, but you have to protect her and then she would be the one unrestricted. So you're not going to, look, she would be the unrestricted free agent if she was available. Let's be honest about that. Like, if they're taking Kate Martin over Kelsey Plum, somebody needs to tell that organization to change some things up. But no, so there's a lot that goes into it. And I think it's very easy to see the end result and just assume that it happened 1, 2, 3. But in reality, I think we know that there's a lot of wheeling and dealing in the background. Will it ever come to light? I don't know. There's a lot of questions of why this team did that, why this team did this. I will say, looking at the 13th team roster, notably, they did not take anyone from Seattle. I get it. Seattle roster, very top heavy. Totally makes sense to me. The players that they obviously would have protected would have been players that I think you would have wanted. And if, the other players are not players you wanted. So why waste a roster spot? The devil's advocate of that is take it because it doesn't hit any cap space. And then you can trade them, you can move them, you can cut them, whatever. Look, I look at this Valkyrie's roster and they need a draft and they need some free agency additions if this team wants to be outside of the lottery. And I'm just being blunt here. I think they can be. I think they've picked some nice pieces. How can they gel them together? Also,
they
this team
looks in the lottery. The goal should be the lottery. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And this team honestly lacks offensive firepower. If I'm being blunt,
it's too early for me to even get into oh, we got a squad. I can't even because it's like 1/8 of the pie right now of the total picture that we're going to be talking about come March. So it's kind of just that first step of building this roster and that first kind of unveiling of kind of getting a semblance of what this looks like. But there's obviously a ton of movement that's going to happen here in the next couple months.
I very much agree. Rachel, I had to put you on the spot. I'm gonna need it. Who's your GOAT?
Oh man, I don't want to do this today. Oh, I'm gonna mix it up. I'm gonna go Lisa Leslie.
Love it.